see?
Oh, it's the, yeah. It's the, hey, that's,
The 80s turned darkness into a punchline and somehow got away with it. Studios greenlit premises that would get a modern executive fired before lunch. Critics called most of them irresponsible. And audiences showed up anyway because somewhere underneath the chaos, these films were saying something true. Decades later, the safe ones are gone, and these are the ones people still argue about. A Fish Called Wanda nearly killed John Cleese's career before it started, cost him $150,000 of his own money, and still managed to kill someone in a cinema 2 years after it came out. Cleese, the actor you probably know as Nearly Headless Nick from the first 2 Harry Potter films, wrote the script, starred in it, and produced it himself, playing a buttoned-up barrister who gets seduced into a diamond heist by 4 double-crossing criminals who immediately begin destroying each other. 4 studios passed on the script, apparently unconvinced that a British heist comedy was what American audiences were crying out for, and they were wrong by about $62 million. The actor playing Otto put live goldfish in his mouth across multiple takes, coming dangerously close to swallowing several of them mid-line. Cleese later said writing, starring in, and producing the same film simultaneously left him creatively empty for years, which makes sense for a man who spent a decade fighting to get something made that nobody wanted to touch. The film grossed $62 million domestically, and in 1989, a man's heart gave out during the French fry scene, which is the kind of legacy most comedies spend decades chasing and never get close to. Who Framed Roger Rabbit cost Disney $40 million more than planned, left its lead actor hallucinating cartoon characters in hotel rooms for close to a year, and still became the most technically ambitious comedy the 80s produced. Bob Hoskins plays a bitter private detective in a 1940s Los Angeles where animated characters are a real working-class minority facing erasure. He is hired to clear a cartoon star's name before a villain named Judge Doom can bulldoze their entire neighborhood to build a freeway. Hoskins spent 8 months training himself to see animated figures in empty space until his brain stopped being able to turn it off. His doctors recommended 5 months off, but Hoskins took a full year because he was still seeing cartoon weasels creep out of walls at dinner parties. He later described the whole experience as screwing up his brain completely, which is a strange thing to say about $250 million. Kathleen Turner voiced Jessica Rabbit entirely uncredited, recording the whole performance while 7 months pregnant, paid well below her market rate as a major star, and audiences were so baffled by the voice that a rumor spread for years that it was a synthesized mix of different actresses. Then in 1994, bored animators were discovered to have hidden 3 frames in the Laserdisc release where Jessica appears without underwear, forcing Disney to pull thousands of discs from shelves, which recontextualized the film overnight, from family-friendly breakthrough to adult content scandal. Trading Places turned a $1 bet between 2 billionaires into a federal law, which is not something most comedies manage to do. 2 brothers who run a commodities firm bet on nature versus nurture by destroying a wealthy executive's life and handing everything he had to a street hustler played by Eddie Murphy. Turns out street survival and Wall Street require the exact same skill set. Jamie Lee Curtis took $70,000 to play the role, a 90% pay cut from what she had been making on Halloween sequels, because the studio did not want her, and director John Landis had to fight Paramount to cast her. She later said Landis single-handedly changed the course of her life by giving her that part, which eventually led to A Fish Called Wanda, which led to True Lies, which led to the Oscar she won 40 years later. None of which would have happened if the casting had gone the way it was originally planned. The climax landed hard enough that a 2010 federal reform law banned the film's central trading practice, now officially known in financial regulation as the Eddie Murphy Rule. Clue is the movie Paramount gave 3 different endings, released randomly across theaters, confused everyone, and then seemed genuinely surprised when nobody came back for a second look. 6 strangers are invited to a mansion, given fake names like Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet, told their host has been blackmailing them all, and when he turns up dead, every one of them becomes a suspect, while Tim Curry's butler sprints between rooms trying to hold the whole thing together. The film's most famous moment, the flames on the side of my face breakdown, was not in the script at all. It came from one cast member channeling 14-hour days of genuine exhaustion into a single take that the director kept because nothing planned could have matched it. The woman who got the French maid part beat out Madonna for it by showing up to the audition already wearing a rented costume with the accent fully committed, and the director hired her on the spot. That accent was so aggressively fake, it functioned as its own joke, and the film saves its best use of it for the moment right before she is murdered, when she drops it completely and screams in plain American English, which lands harder than anything else in the scene. The film returned $14.6 million against a $15 million budget. Home Video put all three endings together, and the version everyone now considers definitive is the one Paramount thought would confuse audiences into staying away. Throw Mama from the Train was filmed by a dying woman who kept it secret from everyone on set to avoid being replaced. She received an Oscar nomination 8 months before she died. The film follows a frustrated writing professor whose student, a man-child desperate to escape his tyrannical mother, misreads a passing complaint about an ex-wife as a formal murder agreement. The comedy lives entirely in how seriously both men take something neither one actually agreed to. Throat cancer surgery had already removed part of the actress's tongue and jaw before cameras rolled. That is exactly where the slurred, labored speech came from, a performance built from what the disease had already done to her, rather than anything she was pretending. Danny DeVito was simultaneously making his directorial debut, working 20-hour days, losing weight, running on almost no sleep, and later said he felt aged by a decade by the time the film wrapped, which tells you something about his state of mind, that the next film he chose to direct was called The War of the Roses. Ramsey died 8 months after the film was released, which means the performance that finally made her famous was also the last thing she ever finished. Weekend at Bernie's nearly drowned its star, cracked his ribs, and grossed $30 million anyway, which says something about the specific stubbornness the 80s rewarded. The film follows two insurance guys who find their boss dead at his beach house and spend the entire weekend propping his corpse up in sunglasses, convincing everyone he is still alive and partying. The comedy works entirely on the fact that everyone around them is too self-absorbed to notice the difference, which the film presents as a joke, but is fairly clearly also a thesis about the decade. Catherine Mary Stewart, who played the love interest, had so little screen time that she spent most of the shoot taking ballet classes with children in Wilmington, North Carolina, just to fill the hours, while McCarthy and Silverman were being dragged around exhausted on the other side of the lot. One of the leads later said, the film's success was the worst thing that happened to his career, that dragging a corpse around for 2 hours closed the door on every serious role he had been building toward. Two men propping up their dead boss for a free vacation is the 80s in a single image, the appearance of success maintained at any cost regardless of what is rotting underneath. Ruthless People exists because Bette Midler walked into the screen test furious, and that fury is the only reason the film works at all. Word around the casting was that the studio had been quietly looking at younger, softer actresses for the role. Midler's response was to play the screen test as the most abrasive and terrifying version of the character she could imagine, which is one way to handle a casting process when you suspect they are trying to replace you. What she built from that place of genuine professional fear is the engine the film runs on. A kidnapping victim whose husband is so delighted she is gone that he refuses to pay the ransom, hoping the criminals will do the job for him. The directing trio behind Airplane built the pressure cooker and then let Midler and Danny DeVito detonate it, trusting that two actors with absolutely no redeeming qualities between them would hold an audience longer than anything safer. The film grossed over $71 million, which is what happens when Hollywood accidentally makes something meaner than it intended, and the audience turns out to have been waiting for exactly that all along. They Live exists because Roddy Piper was so terrified of failing that he spent 6 weeks taking real punishment in a backyard before the cameras ever rolled. The film he made turned out to be the most politically honest thing John Carpenter ever put on screen. Piper took $50,000 and walked away from his peak earning years in wrestling. He bet his entire career on a film about a drifter who discovers the ruling class are aliens using subliminal advertising to keep humanity passive and consuming, which is Reaganomics described as a horror movie, and not particularly subtle about it. Carpenter understood that casting a wrestler with real exhaustion and real scars written into his face was not a liability, but the entire point. The alleyway fight, two men beating each other to pieces for over 5 minutes, over whether to face an uncomfortable truth, remains one of the most celebrated sequences in the genre. The film's most famous line was a wrestling improvisation Piper pitched out of nerves that accidentally became one of the most quoted lines in action cinema history. They Live became a cult classic. Piper never reached the A-list it promised, and the film he sacrificed his wrestling career to make is now more famous than anything he ever did in the ring. Something Wild starts as a breezy road comedy, spends its entire first half earning your trust, and then Ray Liotta walks into a high school reunion. The colors seem to change on screen, and the film you were watching is gone. Jeff Daniels plays a buttoned-up Manhattan banker pulled into a spontaneous road trip by a free-spirited woman named Lulu, and the whole thing works as a comedy right up until Lulu's violent ex-husband shows up and the weekend stops being an adventure. Liotta stayed so deliberately isolated from his co-stars that he ate alone for most of the shoot. and when he struck Daniels hard enough during the bathroom fight to cause real swelling and a genuine daze, the director held the shot because the look on Daniels' face was exactly what the scene needed. The studio wanted Liotta's violence cut and the whole thing repackaged as a light romantic comedy, and the director refused, nearly walking away from the industry over it. The film grossed $8 million, the studio got the failure they feared, and the director went on to make Silence of the Lambs 4 years later, which in hindsight suggests they probably should have just let him do his thing. Parents is the movie Randy Quaid, the actor you know as Cousin Eddie from Christmas Vacation, refused to break character on for the entire shoot, staying in the role of a cannibalistic suburban father even between takes. The kid playing his son got so genuinely distressed that his own parents considered pulling him from the production. The pressure it created was sustained enough that adults had to actively manage the child's state throughout the shoot. The director built the film around exactly that dread. A 10-year-old in the pastel perfection of 1950 suburbia, growing increasingly certain the meat on the dinner table is not beef. The horror works because it never arrives through gore, but through the slow realization that the people supposed to protect him are the threat. The director tied the whole thing to real history, placing the father at a plant developing defoliants, so the cannibalism reads as something America was already doing under more respectable language. Vestron Pictures put up $7 million, got less than $1 million back, and collapsed shortly after. And based on everything that happened on set, nobody involved seems to have had a particularly good time getting there. That is what these films cost the people who made them, and most of them got written off before anyone noticed, because the 80s had a habit of punishing the ones that were right too early.